500 hours until Election Day. A Supreme Court battle begins as President Trump looks to mount one last comeback, and LeBron James leads the Lakers and the entire NBA to a historic win. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Monday, October 12th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Good morning, Carlo.
Happy Monday, Jill. Today is Columbus and Indigenous Peoples Day, which is not, I think, it's not a work holiday, really, but it is nevertheless a holiday. And so how was your weekend?
My weekend was pretty good. Here we are, right? I know it's so cliche. It's just like too short. I mean, the weekend really is too short. It just goes so quickly.
It always does. But yeah, at least it's, nice, and at least the weather's been good up here. It's been nice and sunny. You've
been getting a lot of sweatshirts or sweater and short days. So I know you love those.
Yes, I have.
You've had a few weeks of them, so I hope you're enjoying it. I do want to. Yes. All right. I do want to get started, though, on where things stand right now. And let's start with the pandemic. Spoiler alert, it's not good. Coronavirus cases and hospitalizations are up across the country. Only 3 states, Texas, Washington, and Maine, are reporting a decline in new cases week over week. About 58,000 new infections were reported on Friday. That is a 2-month high. The situation no better in Europe, where health officials are warning that a combination of a spike in cases and widespread COVID fatigue could hamper mitigation efforts into the winter.
Yeah, we're feeling that COVID fatigue here too, I think. Italy, by the way, which of course was the original epicenter, they have mandated masks outdoors now, not just indoors, but outdoors. And the hospitals in Italy are warning that the beds are starting to fill up for the first time since back in March and April. So we got to keep an eye on that. Also, the UK, any minute now, Boris Johnson expected to address the nation, and we're expecting him to introduce a 3-tiered lockdown system for that country. Meanwhile, Jill, just a little anecdote here. This feels like Groundhog Day, but the Chinese city of Qingdao, they are testing all 9 million residents this week after nine, as in 1 fewer than 10 new cases were found over the weekend linked to a hospital there. Just goes to show you, right? This is all about testing. Meanwhile, 34 people infected from the White House. They're not even attempting to do any contact tracing from that outbreak here.
And by the way, in China right now, there was a holiday over the past weekend. This is the lead from CNN right now. What pandemic? Crowds swarm the Great Wall of China as travel surges during the holiday week. So look, regardless of how many cases you think they actually had, regardless of where you think this virus came from, China's relatively back to normal right now. And we are nowhere near that. So it just goes to show you it can be done if you have a will to do it. We just don't have that will amongst a big part of the population and the government here. So the other big story today, Judge Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings that start on Capitol Hill. Senator Kamala Harris, who has not said whether she or Joe Biden support court packing, will attend remotely because of a lack of COVID safety protocols. So 2 Republican senators who have tested positive are expected to attend the hearings remotely to start and then in person. Democrats are going into the hearings with the goal of just not doing anything to upset Biden's lead in the polls because right now Democrats do not have the votes to sink this nomination. In terms of what to watch, I think Republicans will be looking to highlight Judge Barrett as an accomplished working mother, which she certainly is. Democrats are going to be looking to paint her as an ideologue who would vote against Obamacare and also Roe v. Wade. I think, Carlo, the question here is, are we going to get a court that is highly out of step with American sentiment? Right. I mean, these justices are appointed for life. According to a study from last year, 3 out of 4 Americans support Roe v. Wade and want it to stand. If that just tells you anything about where the psyche is. I do want to mention, actually, Carly, you could get into it because I was going to talk a little bit about what court packing actually means. but I think you get into it here.
Yeah. So I mean, so court packing is basically this idea that you if you control the Senate and the presidency, that you can add seats to the court, right? There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to have 9 justices. So that's sort of the idea, right? I do think that the court packing thing has the chance of becoming sort of like the Hillary Clinton, but her emails issue of 2020. The idea here is, like you said, like if Democrats sweep into office, they could add seats to the bench. I don't think they will do this. Because frankly, they don't have the guts to do it, in my opinion. But I do think that they have to do a better job of messaging and explaining why this is even an issue that we're talking about. The answer to that question, will you pack the court, which has been asked of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, which is certainly a fair question to ask. The answer to that question is, you mean like Mitch McConnell did in 2016 when he unilaterally decided not to even meet with President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, breaking with 100 years of protocol where the Senate would have confirmation hearings regardless of whether or not they were of the same party as the Democrat. So, Senate Democrats, I think, have really dropped the ball on the Supreme Court issue. None of them, in my opinion, should even be attending these hearings, just to make sort of a point about the process itself being sort of illegitimate. I think they are utterly underestimating sort of the anger and the fury in the base of the party, as well as, like you said, the wide opposition to a far-right Supreme Court, which is what we're about to have. To wit, Jamie Harrison, who is challenging Lindsey Graham for his Senate seat in South Carolina, he just raised $57 million last quarter. That's shattered the Senate fundraising record of all time. That kind of thing, Jill, does not happen unless a lot of people are really, really angry.
There are just 3 weeks until Election Day, if you could believe it. President Trump now at his lowest point in the polls in months. The latest national poll from the Washington Post and ABC News has Joe Biden ahead by 12. Nate Silver and 538's national polling average now puts Biden up by 10.3 points with an 86% probability of winning. That is smaller than Trump's chances were back in 2016, but it is not a negligible chance either.
No, it is not. And like you said in the open, there's always time for a comeback, right? And if anybody knows that, it's the president himself.
For me, by the way, it's not a comeback. I think that there's just, and JD. So the one, okay. I don't want to step on you too much. Actually, you finish what you're going to say, and then I'll come in. Sorry.
That's okay. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say that the president is expected back on the campaign trail today. His doctor has declared him transmission free from coronavirus. However, we should mention that we still don't know if he's tested negative. They won't. The White House is being really cagey about that for some reason. So he will be in Florida at a big rally today. Axios is reporting this morning that the president has basically told the campaign he wants to be out on the trail, hitting the pavement in person every day between now and November 3rd. And he has a lot of work to do to close that gap. I understand that a lot of people don't believe the polls. 10 points down going into Election Day, that's the worst place an incumbent has been since 1936.
Okay, so 2 things. The president says he's now negative, but the official statement from his doctor just says that he is no longer contagious. So that's very, very different. Then you would think that if the president took a test and it was negative, they would just say that. They also in the latest note said, he's symptom free and hasn't had a fever for 24 hours. So did he have a fever 48 hours ago? Like what is going on? I mean,
I don't get why they don't just
tea leaves.
Yeah.
So those notes, and JD Durkin, who I'm going to quote a lot these days because he's pretty smart. He actually had this great tweet where he showed that the president's doctor is no longer signing the memos. Like in the beginning of everything, and whenever he used to put out a memo about the president's health, he would actually sign his signature over it. And he's pointing out that lately there are no signatures from the doctor, and there's been a lot of spelling errors and kind of like typos and stuff. So you just have to, again, reading the tea leaves, trying to figure out, exactly what's going on. Okay. I did interview just back to this issue of polling, right? So Trump was actually down by more in 2016. So if you look at 2016 as a measure, because President Trump is such an unprecedented guy, right? And he's just so different in terms of his support that he gets and the way he does politics. So it's hard to even say no president in history or no incumbent, because this is just like he's writing his own rules here.
Sure.
So I interviewed this editor from Time magazine, and she said, if you think that the media was out of touch back in 2016, 2020, journalists can't even leave the house for the most part. So you are talking about a situation where we really don't know what is going on in a lot of places in this country, simply because it's not safe to travel. How do we get news for the most part? Journalists go, or we watch reporters out in the field talking to people. That's become increasingly difficult. So it's very hard to know how people really feel. So JD's point was, look, I traveled to some of these places. There are a lot more Trump signs on people's lawns than there are Biden signs. If that tells you anything, it's so anecdotal. It's so very specific, right. But it talks about this enthusiasm gap. So whatever the polls may say, if somebody interviews somebody who says they're going to vote for Biden, but they're not really motivated to do it in 3 weeks from now, and there's a pandemic, and they're like, meh, like there's a 4-hour wait, I'm not going to go. That becomes that it doesn't matter in terms of the polling ahead of time, right?
Of course, it's about turnout.
So that's where you look at the polls, and that's where turnout is everything, as we know, and as we've said before. So go on.
No, I'm just gonna say but there has been massive turnout already in early voting. I think Democrats are, just based on, again, go back to the donations for these down ballot candidates. Democrats are fired up to vote Donald Trump out of office. I understand what you're saying, and obviously you should be wary of the polls because they're not necessarily always right. But when you have every major poll in this country saying Donald Trump is down by 10 points. I'm not saying that he can't win, but it's not like they're just making up those numbers, right? They're calling people, and they're sampling in certain ways, and they're trying to take into account, Trump's base of support. So, I think he is setting up to lose in a landslide election. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I don't think that you can just discount all of the polling and all the work that all of these pollsters are doing, just because the president has proven them wrong in the past.
No, and they've made changes, right? The pollsters have also made changes to the way that they conduct the polls. So I'm not dismissing the polls. I'm just saying, what's the point of a poll? The poll is to try to figure out who's going to win on election day, and I'm saying I don't think that the polls are necessarily the best indication right now, just because of many, many different factors. So I'm just kind of trying to I think Democrats think they've got this thing locked up, and I just don't think that's the case. It's pretty much what I'm saying.
I don't think so at all. I don't think that at all. I think the Democrats are terrified that they're going to lose.
Okay, let's talk about the status of the next stimulus bill, which is still quite up in the air. So President Trump, if you remember, took any new stimulus off the table before Election Day, right? That happened right when he came out of the hospital. But then the White House reversed course and then reopened a push for a smaller, more narrow $1.8 trillion bill. That was rejected by both parties in Congress. House Democrats say it doesn't do nearly enough. Senate Republicans say it is a betrayal of GOP priorities. From everything that I've been told, $2 trillion is kind of the big number. That Democrats want more than $2 trillion. Republicans want way less than that. So that $2 trillion number is, I think, the number to watch.
What's interesting here is that the fact that the White House can't get Senate Republicans on board here, I think, is really interesting, and I think it speaks to the president's sort of incompetence as a negotiator for sure. But also, what I think that, going back to what we were just talking about, I think the Republicans in the Senate are setting themselves up to be the opposition party. I think Mitch McConnell thinks they're going to lose. I think they're going to lose the chamber, and they're sort of setting themselves up to be kind of like the party of fiscal restraint in a Joe Biden administration. So that's just what my gut feeling is, because there is, again, we've said this before, but there's no reason why in an election year, the home stretch of an election year, that Republicans who are already endangered, wouldn't want to be sending out money to people who really need it.
There also seems to be, just kind of switching gears here, a growing sense among the country's biggest and most influential companies and institutions that life will not be quote unquote back to normal in the US until next summer. So, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon, he said over the weekend that the bank's offices almost certainly won't be fully staffed until then. And that is assuming a vaccine becomes available. Facebook and Google, they've been telling employees that they can work from home through June of 2021. So that's like the new target next summer.
Yeah, that's it. That June 2021 time frame is starting to feel like that's what the smart money is betting on. Broadway, by the way, just announced yesterday they're going to stay closed until next summer. So the theaters had been tentatively planning to come back after the new year. Obviously, that was probably not going to happen. So now they're just saying straight up, not until next summer. So I think next summer is sort of the timeline, and it feels good to me to hear these things, Jill, actually, because I think one of the hardest things about this year has just been this sort of sense of, you've talked about this, right? There's just no light at the end of the tunnel, right? And I think when you don't have that sense of something to look forward to, something to strive towards, it really just it makes you just feel down, right? So I like hearing this. I like hearing that we have some of the smartest people in the country starting to think about what a return to normalcy looks like. We don't even really know what that'll mean, and obviously things could change. But I like it, and that puts us about halfway there, right? That's June is what, 7 months from now, 7, 8 months from now. We can do it. We've 7, 8 months ago, Jill, you and I were talking about it was February. We were just going about our lives, talking about this weird virus that was coming out of China. So look, we can do it, right? We're halfway there.
I love whoever you are right now. I'm into it, Carlo.
Thank you. It's the new me.
On that note, by the way, did you happen to catch 60 Minutes last night?
I did. What did they have on?
Okay, so they had a really they did kind of a deep dive into the medicines that the president is taking or was taking. And just kind of did a temperature check of where we are in terms of fighting the virus from the medicinal side. They talked about, obviously, the remdesivir, which is not a cure, but has been showing a lot of success in cutting down the timeline that somebody's in the hospital. They talk about the steroid that he's on, which is readily available and pretty cheap, which has done a lot to really cut down on inflammation, which is one of the big reasons that people who are seriously sick, that they can't make it. It's just that there's just like this massive inflammation. They also talk about this cocktail from Regeneron, this antibody cocktail. Eli Lilly has one as well. And how effective it is still not 100% known. It's showing a lot of preliminary promise, according to the doctors that they interviewed. But the biggest part of it is that it's not really showing to do harm. So there's not really a downside to taking it. You're not going to have any serious side effects. And they've been using similar types of treatments for cancer patients and other people who are sick for years. But interestingly, they asked every single doctor and expert. So they said, would you rather have a vaccine or a cure or some type of therapeutic or, mask wearing? And to a person, they all said a mask. That it's simple, it's cheap, it works. So just on that note of trying to stay positive about this, we know what works, right? Just wear a mask, and does it cut everything down to 0%? No, but it does. You can go out there if everybody's in a mask and you're in a mask, you do have a level of protection.
Absolutely, Jill. That's a good point. And it's what the CDC director said a few weeks back when he got sort of like cut down at the knees by the president. But what they're trying to say is a vaccine, people need to stop thinking about a vaccine as being this silver bullet, right? Even a vaccine at 70% efficacy, 3 in 10 people who take it could still get sick. That's a significant number. So it's the combination of these things, and to your point about the antibody cocktails, it's the feeling that if you do get sick, you will be able to go into the hospital and get better and come back home. It's not this death sentence, right?
That is the hope. Okay. In other news, the curtain fell on the NBA bubble last night with the LA Lakers claiming their 17th championship after beating the Miami Heat in 6 games to close out a season that's lasted nearly a whole year. LeBron James was named Finals MVP for the 4th time, putting him behind only Michael Jordan. The team dedicated its win to Kobe Bryant, who, of course, died earlier this year. Carlo, this concludes what was arguably the most successful experiment in how to live and work with COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like you said in the open, obviously LeBron and the Lakers deserve a lot of credit, but so does every team and every member of every team that really sacrificed, I think, to make the bubble work. And they deserve a lot of credit for it. LeBron, by the way, now has more rings than the entire New York Knicks franchise. I just wanted to point that out because it's so depressing. And also, Jill, speaking of champions, I don't know if you caught the French Open this weekend, but Nadal now tied with Roger Federer for most Grand Slam titles after he just crushed Djokovic on the clay courts out there in France. Federer congratulated his, quote, greatest rival for his 20th win, saying that they've both pushed each other over the years to become better players. But pretty remarkable. These two guys are now tied, right?
Yeah, no, and it's incredible that they're still out there kind of slugging
still
away.
Going. Yeah, totally.
And finally, Carlo, really quickly, I don't know if you watched SNL this weekend, comedian
I
Bill
caught
Burr.
some, yeah.
He is being both cheered and also condemned for his polarizing monologue about white feminism and cancel culture. He hosted this episode. It was better received than the season premiere. It featured Jack White filling in as the last-minute musical guest after Morgan Wallen was bounced for breaking COVID protocols. The opening monologue certainly got a lot of people talking. So Carlo, talk to me.
I mean, we don't have a lot of time today, Jill. So I think tomorrow maybe we should get more into this. But yeah, you guys should, watch the monologue. I didn't find it that controversial. He's a controversial stand-up comedian, so you got to sort of like take it with a grain of salt, I guess. Like he is who he is. But I didn't find what he said to be particularly insulting or anything. But by the way, watched the Jack White performances last night. This guy or Saturday night, he has got to be maybe the best living guitar player in the world. I mean, they called him 3 days ago and were like, "Hey, we need a musical guest for SNL."
Help.
And he was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it." And he just crushed it. Unbelievable.
Okay. All right. We will leave it there. I guess write us in. Let us know what you think about Bill Burr and how he did, and we can read some of that tomorrow on the podcast. Everyone have a great day. Whether you're working or not today, enjoy it. That's what you need to know for Monday, October 12th.
Bye, guys.